I'm Esther George, President of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, and I serve as executive sponsor of the FedNow program on behalf of the Federal Reserve Banks. Last August, I welcomed you to a similar event here in Kansas City as we announced the Federal Reserve's decision to develop a new instant payment system. Today, I'm pleased to welcome you again for an update on our progress. From the start, the engagement with the banking and payments industry has been a critical part of our effort to modernize the nation's payment system. Your involvement included feedback on our public consultation paper in 2013, your participation on the Faster and Secure Payments Task Forces, which we started up in 2015, and as recently as last year when we received hundreds of comment letters about the central bank's role in fostering an accessible, safe, and efficient payment system for our nation. Your contributions to our payments improvement efforts have been so valuable, and we look forward to continuing those conversations as we advance toward the launch of the FedNow Service. Joining me today is Governor Lael Brainard, who has provided tremendous leadership to the Federal Reserve's work on payments. She's going to be offering remarks on a Federal Register notice release, which will describe our progress related to developing this new instant payment system and its planned features and functionality. Ken Montgomery, who is the first Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at the Boston Federal Reserve Bank, is also here. Ken serves as the executive overseeing this work, and he's capably leading the talented team that's working on this important initiative. Following Governor Brainard's remarks, there will be a question and answer session, and you'll be able to submit your questions to the three of us. And so with that, I am very pleased today to turn the program over to Governor Brainard.
Well, thank you. It is a real pleasure to be here today with you, Esther, and with Ken to talk about the future of America's retail payment system. The retail payment infrastructure touches every American. That's why 1 year ago, the Federal Reserve committed to build its first major new payment system in 4 decades. Although no one anticipated at that time the challenges our nation would soon face, the COVID-19 pandemic has heightened the urgency and importance of delivering a resilient instant payment system that is accessible to all Americans. The pandemic is taking a tremendous toll on communities across America, especially households and small businesses with the least liquid resources to weather the storm. Emergency relief payments authorized in the CARES Act provided a vital lifeline for many households. After sharply reducing their spending early in the crisis, many households increased their spending starting on the day they received the emergency relief payments and continuing for the following 10 days. That rapid increase in spending was greatest for households with lower incomes, greater income declines, and lower liquid savings. The urgency with which the emergency payments were spent underscores the importance of immediate access to funds for many households and businesses that face cash flow constraints. The CARES Act payments were dispersed to households using direct deposit, prepaid debit cards, and checks, which can take several days between the time the funds are sent and the times recipients can access those funds. By contrast, instant payments could have helped reduce the strain for those who needed the funds quickly in order to meet financial obligations. The same is true for other payments intended to provide immediate assistance, for example, after natural disasters. In good times as well as bad, instant payments will enable millions of American households and businesses to get instant access to funds rather than waiting days for checks to clear. Immediate availability of funds could be especially important for households on fixed incomes or living paycheck to paycheck, when waiting days for the funds to be available to pay a bill can mean overdraft fees or late fees that can compound, or reliance on costly sources of credit. For small businesses, the ability to receive customer payments instantly could help manage cash flows when working capital is tied up in materials or inventory. For the 1 in 10 Americans who regularly work in the gig economy, getting immediate access to the payments for their work could help address their cash flow constraints when money's tight. Consumers and businesses across the country want and expect instant payments, and the banks they trust should be able to provide this service securely. 1 year ago, the Federal Reserve announced we would build the FedNow Service to enable banks of every size and in every community in America to provide safe and efficient instant payment services around the clock every day of the year. The Federal Reserve is uniquely positioned to build an instant payment system in keeping with our long history of operating payment systems to promote a safe, efficient, and broadly accessible payment infrastructure. Our public mission in providing those payment services is built on the proposition that all banks and the communities they serve, no matter their size or geographic location, should have equitable access. Through the direct connections we have with more than 10,000 banks, FedNow will be broadly accessible. The FedNow service will not only expand but also strengthen the U.S. payment infrastructure by operating alongside the private sector real-time payment RTP service. Many banks may choose to maintain access to more than one instant payment service to attain resiliency through redundancy, as they do currently for other payment services. The Federal Reserve has always had a vital role in the payment system by providing liquidity and operational continuity in times of stress, and the FedNow service would extend this role directly into instant payments. Together, FedNow and RTP should significantly increase the speed and efficiency of the U.S. payment system, and the presence of more than one service provider will also bring benefits for consumers associated with greater competition, according to analysis from the GAO. Since last August, we've made substantial strides in developing the FedNow service, including on the evaluation of prototypes of the core clearing and settlement functionality. Across the Federal Reserve System, work on FedNow has continued apace, commensurate with the high priority of this initiative, even as we've been mobilizing an unprecedented response to the COVID-19 crisis. We have a team of over 100 people working on the program, including experts drawn from across our system and key hires from outside. Since we initiated FedNow 1 year ago, we've been hitting our program milestones. And today, I'm pleased to announce the Federal Reserve Board has approved the core features and functionality based on extensive input from stakeholders. The FedNow design we're announcing today benefited tremendously from industry feedback, including almost 200 comment letters. In addition to the core interbank clearing and settlement functionality that will enable consumers and businesses to send and receive payments through participating banks, FedNow will include features that enhance its usability. We heard loud and clear from stakeholders the primary importance of getting this service to market as quickly as possible. And to meet this goal, we're announcing a phased approach that will enable the FedNow service to get to market expeditiously with a core set of features, and then to expand available features over time in response to changes in technology and market needs. Let me just touch on a few of the key features of the initial service offering. First, we heard strong support for fraud tools to support banks' efforts to mitigate the risk of fraud with instant payments. Accordingly, on implementation, banks will be able to set their parameters that limit transaction activity in FedNow based on their knowledge of their own customers. And as we gain insights from banks' experience with that initial set of fraud tools, we'll explore other ways to fight fraud that may be valuable, including centralized monitoring by the FedNow service. Second, banks told us they want to be able to ensure they have adequate funds in their Federal Reserve accounts on a 24/7 by 365 basis to cover outflows related to instant payments, especially during hours when existing payment services aren't open and funds can't be transferred into Federal Reserve accounts to cover intraday overdrafts. So we will develop a liquidity management tool that allows a participant with excess funds in its Federal Reserve account to transfer funds to another participant who needs the funds on weekends, holidays, and after hours. Moreover, we'll make the liquidity management tool available for instant payments broadly, including to banks that choose not to participate in FedNow. Participants in a private sector Instant Payment Service will be able to use the tool to transfer funds from their Federal Reserve accounts to the joint account that backs settlement in that service. Third, it's important for the FedNow service to be interoperable with the private sector instant payment service to accomplish the goal of nationwide reach. As we've learned from experience with our other payment services, the form and timeline for achieving interoperability depends a lot on the level of commitment and engagement from stakeholders across the industry, including other instant payment settlement service operators, both present and future. In part, to facilitate interoperability, the FedNow design will use the widely accepted ISO 20022 message standard and other industry best practices. To the extent other instant payment services fully adopt the same publicly available, widely accepted standard, this approach would enable interoperability whereby banks can route payments through either the FedNow service or other instant payment services based on the available path to the receiver. This is similar to the approach that is used in payment card transactions, for instance. We're open to collaborating in an alternative form of interoperability whereby messages would be exchanged directly between the FedNow service and the private sector service instant payment operators, similar to the approach used in ACH. Implementing this approach would significantly increase the required level of commitment and active engagement of the private sector instant payment service operators from the outset. In order to minimize time to market, additional features would be introduced in phases after launch. It will be important for FedNow to support alias-based payments, payments that can be sent to a recipient using an alias such as an email address or phone number rather than requiring an account number. But providing this feature securely requires addressing legal, operational, and security challenges that would increase the time to market for the core service. So in balancing those considerations, we decided to explore the best ways to add a directory service or other approach to alias-based payments with the goal of providing this as a high priority following the initial launch. As we proceed with the development of FedNow, we will continue our strong engagement with stakeholders to gain input on desired features and to work with banks and their service providers on preparedness for adoption. In May, we announced the formation of the FedNow community with over 500 members from all segments of the payment ecosystem who would like to help inform the development of FedNow. We're working with service providers, recognizing how important they are in providing essential payment processing services for thousands of banks in this country. We're also engaging with fintech and software companies who provide customer-facing services that will help banks build innovative instant payment products to serve their communities. The readiness of these service providers to support banks' participation in FedNow and expand its potential uses through value-added services will be key to widespread adoption. It's been an eventful year for retail payments, with technology players introducing new business models and accelerating the pace of digitalization. The central bank, our focus on the safety and integrity of the payment system means we need to ensure payment innovations don't come at the cost of security, reliability, or consumer protection. Some newer payment services, while providing what has the look and feel of instant payments, in fact rely on legacy infrastructure that settle on a deferred basis, which creates risks for consumers, banks, and the payment system. In contrast, FedNow will offer real-time gross settlement of transactions, which avoids interbank credit risk by processing each transaction individually and immediately. Efforts by global stablecoin networks such as Facebook's Libra to drive the next stage of payment innovation have raised other fundamental questions about legal and regulatory safeguards, financial stability, and even the appropriate role of private money. We are committed to build an instant payment service that delivers the speed that users want without bypassing the legal and regulatory protections they've come to expect from banking relationships. Ultimately, FedNow can be a catalyst for innovation in the market by providing a neutral platform on which the private sector can build to offer safe, efficient payment services. The Federal Reserve remains optimistic about the power of technology and innovation to deliver payments safely, immediately, and efficiently when the appropriate safeguards are in place. We think FedNow holds the promise of providing a modern payment infrastructure for the future, bringing the benefits of instant payments to communities across America and improving the way households, businesses, and government agencies make and receive payments for many years to come. So with that, let me wrap up and hand it over to Ken.
Thank you, Governor Brainard. Before we start answering questions, I'd like to remind our webinar participants that you can submit questions at any time by clicking on the Ask Question button in the webinar tool. So while we wait for questions to come in, I'll start off by reiterating the points made by Governor Brainard on the status of the FedNow Service development, as I'm sure this issue is on the minds of many people watching today's event. So we've made tremendous progress on developing the service, and today's announcement by the Board of Governors marks an important milestone. At this stage, business requirements are complete for the core service, and we have seen prototypes of several design solutions. The FedNow team has also drafted ISO message flows and specifications for the initial release and is currently seeking industry input on these. Our goal is to publish final message specs by the first quarter of next year. I am pleased to report that the COVID-19 pandemic has not negatively impacted our progress thus far. Implementing the FedNow service as soon as possible remains a high priority for the Federal Reserve. We are committed to transparency about our progress, and we will provide periodic updates as key milestones are achieved. Information will be provided through our established communication channels, such as frbservices.org. We are likewise finalizing our technology strategy that will incorporate a blend of internal Federal Reserve resources and partnerships with external vendors. Our intention is to prioritize using resources and technologies to create a flexible infrastructure that is able to meet current as well as future needs. And as we formalize our technology strategy, this is something likewise we want to continue to keep the industry informed regarding our progress. So let me now turn. We do have some questions coming in. The first question is for you, President George, and the question is, what payment use cases will banks be able to offer their customers through the FedNow service?
Thanks, Ken. So that's a great question. Let me start by saying the way I think about it, I'll go back to the way Governor Brainard described this service, and that is FedNow is designed really to be basic infrastructure. It will be a platform, both flexible as well as neutral, that will give the industry the opportunity to really build those use cases off of. I think at the most fundamental level, when you think about what's being delivered here, this service is designed to really be an interbank settlement engine that will allow funds transfers from a sender's bank account to a receiver's bank account in near real time, at any time. So banks and their service providers are going to be able to build on this fundamental capability to offer what they deem to be value-added services to their own customers. I'm sure that over time, that as banks participate and their non-bank partners are involved, they will ultimately decide what is it the customer wants and how can they leverage this FedNow platform to deliver that. So as Ken mentioned, what we are committed to do is to continually engage with the industry so that we understand what features and functionalities can be part of the FedNow service that will ultimately support what the industry needs to deliver to their customers.
Governor Brainard, the next question is for you, and you touched a bit on this, but how is the Fed going to solve for interoperability with the existing private sector RTGS service for instant payments?
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, so it's a really important question. Obviously, we put a very high priority on interoperability. We are committed to advancing interoperability in order to achieve nationwide reach in instant payment. And of course, we know this is a high priority for industry as well. Now, of course, interoperability inherently requires collaboration. This is not something that we can do on our own. We really need the industry, stakeholders, banks, bank service providers, service operators. We all need to be working together and defining a common goal. So on our own, we are doing what we can to advance this goal. For instance, we believe that using the widely accepted ISO 20022 standard and other industry best practices will be helpful in removing unnecessary and burdensome things that might stand in the way of payment routing. And by doing that, we hope to promote interoperability by the payments that could be messages that could be sent either through FedNow or through the private sector service could be routed based on the available path to the receiver, as well as other criteria such as price and features. That's one of the models that's discussed in the recently released paper on interoperability by the Faster Payments Council. Of course, it is what we see today in card payments, but we're also open to a model of interoperability based on message exchange between service operators, such as with ACH. That approach just has additional complexities, which requires the full commitment and active engagement of the operators from the outset. So we're very committed to interoperability. We think it's entirely achievable. We're doing already what we can on our side to promote it, but ultimately it will depend on collaboration.
President George, how can the industry continue to have input in the development of the FedNow service? President George, you're on mute.
Thank you, Ken. This is how we help each other throughout this whole project. So your question about industry involvement in the development of this service, I think really continues something that we've been doing throughout the thinking about how we would modernize the payment system. And that is making sure that we have close engagement and collaboration with the industry, and that we are also being transparent about how we're going about doing that. So as Governor Brainard mentioned in her remarks, we are going to continue getting industry feedback through the new FedNow community. So this is a group of industry stakeholders that we will engage to provide insights to help us gauge how our development of FedNow should evolve. When I look at that today, it's a pretty robust group. We have more than 500 members that represent more than 400 different organizations across the spectrum of the payments industry. That forum is going to be critical to us because it will have the diversity in it to give us different viewpoints, to provide expertise across different segments. And so we'll rely on that forum to help us look at design features, to influence how the product is developed over time. And that, of course, has been our commitment historically, obviously will be essential going forward. Just to give you a sense of how we've been doing that and using that FedNow community, last month we kicked off the FedNow ISO 20022 working group. So that will be a group within the FedNow community that's going to help us think about how that industry standard will affect message flows and individual message implementation guidelines. We'll also be taking a similar approach with reconcilement, so putting together a group that will help us think about how reconcilement occurs in the FedNow service and instant payments more generally. So again, I hope that gives you a sense of just how important industry engagement has been to us, but obviously will continue to be as we roll out this new payment system.
So Governor Brainard, will the FedNow service end up being replaced by things like Facebook Libra or central bank digital currencies?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've certainly seen a tremendous pace of innovation in the payments arena. Efforts by global stablecoin networks such as Facebook's Libra to drive the next stage of payment innovation have raised some fundamental questions about legal and regulatory safeguards, financial stability, and even the appropriate role of private money. That has intensified calls for central banks to be looking at digital currencies in order to maintain the sovereign currency as the anchor of the nation's payment system. And as you know, China has been moving ahead rapidly on its work on a digital currency, building on the tremendous reach of its mobile payments platform. So given all of that, given the dollar's important role, of course it's important for us as America's central bank to remain on the frontier of research and policy development regarding central bank digital currency. So we are engaging in research and experimentation. We're collaborating with other central banks. But our real operational focus has to be on providing the instant payment service that customers, businesses, and banks currently want and deserve. The promise of FedNow is that it will enable low-cost instant payments for consumers and businesses through their trusted bank account providers with the same important consumer protections associated with bank services, such as deposit insurance, error resolution, and fraud protections. And of course, those are the kinds of protections that may not exist with other non-bank service providers. That's why we think it's so important to continue meeting those project milestones on FedNow.
So President George, what are things that banks should be doing to get ready to use the FedNow service?
Yeah, so when we think about what lies ahead, I think it is not too soon when you ask what should banks be doing now to start thinking about what implementation of instant payments means down to the level of thinking about your customers. So I think it's important now, first of all, stay informed, stay educated about instant payments. It's obviously a first step for a bank to understand how to build out its strategy around this. Being aware of what the benefits, the functionality, I think will help any institution think about how it can serve its customers with this product. The rollout of a new payment service, of course, takes a lot of time, and I can think over history, just as we've modified existing services, the lead time it takes to evaluate, to make decisions in your own organization, the budgeting, the preparation, all the way to an implementation plan takes time. And I think given how fundamentally different this product's going to be, it's not too soon to start that now. So the things I think about for banks and credit unions that will be looking at this is what changes does your institution need to make for you to offer an instant payment, one that is going to be available up to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year. That would include addressing things like what does it mean technically? What will it mean for accounting, for our operations, for our staffing, for the cost ultimately? So we understand that as we transition to a new payment infrastructure, that's going to take some effort, and we're committed to working with you as we go through that, but it will be hard work. It will involve the hard work some of you are doing now, that we're doing now, to try to make sure that this platform serves the country for many years to come, and that we realize the broad benefits to the American public that we have in front of us by delivering it. So we'll be part of that as banks think about what's involved, and we look forward to working with you as you build out your own plans.
So you mentioned budgets, you mentioned cost. A follow-up question is, how much is it going to cost to build the and what can you tell us about the fees?
Yeah, so the cost issue is one I know is important to all of you, and it's important to us as well. So we don't have a number right now because we are still in the process of really settling on our technology strategy, which will of course determine what does it cost to put this system together. So we're in the final stages of really coming to grips with that. What I can tell you is, though, we have some experience from modernization efforts that we've undertaken in the past around existing services. And we also have been watching other countries. So we know the experience of other central banks. And that informs our view of what the approximate cost could be that will allow us to fully recover our costs, which of course we're required to do by the Monetary Control Act and by the Board of Governors pricing principles. So with all that in mind, that's where the hard work is right now, is really thinking about what it costs to build and the business case around that. You ask about, excuse me, the fees that will be associated with that. And obviously we know that is also an important feature of how banks design their strategies and think about this particular service. So the board has indicated that we're going to base these fees on transaction costs that will be associated with a mature volume estimate. So we know that this is a service that will have an early adoption rate, and it will take some time to understand what mature volume estimates would be. So as we get closer to implementation, we'll be able to give the industry more concrete cost information. We'll be in a position to talk about what our fees are. And we'll do that just as we do with our current financial services, making sure that we give advance notice of what that service cost and the fees around that.
So the next question is for me. And the question is, can you talk more about fraud prevention features that may be included as part of FedNow, such as tokenization? So I'll say that we've heard from the industry about the importance of tools to combat fraud. And those tools will be offered at the launch of the FedNow service and augmented over time. And so as we look at what's available at the initial launch would be that we are implementing transaction value limits for all FedNow transactions, but participating banks will have the ability to set lower value limits for their individual transactions. Likewise, the service will also allow the ability to specify certain conditions under which transactions would be rejected, say by an account number or something like that. We'll also provide a set of reporting features and related functionality. Will basically allow a number of payment messages that were rejected based on participant settings. Regarding tokenization, that's something that we are evaluating right now. Likely will not be available in what I'll call an end-to-end solution in the early phases, but we are looking at other aspects of security around fraud detection as we start rolling the service. Esther, back to you for another question. That is, why won't a directory service be available when a FedNow service goes live?
Yeah, you know, Ken, as you are well aware, as we gathered input from the industry about what would be important to an instant payment service like FedNow, excuse me, the issue of having an alias-based or directory-based service came up a lot. And as we talked about that, we know that's going to be really important. The ability to offer what we shorthand call P2P services that let people use an email or a phone number is going to be an important feature at some point. What we had to ultimately think about, though, was the other push that we heard from the industry, and that is we need this service quickly. And so as we looked at what it would take to really settle on a directory, a way that we could incorporate those aliases into the service, we made the trade-off, and it was a difficult trade-off, but I think an important one, to say it's important to get this service to market quickly. So we would first emphasize and prioritize getting the Fed service functionality delivered, get that infrastructure in place, and then we will very quickly turn to how could we enable directory functionality to be able to provide value that we know will be an important part of this service. So rather than work on that at the front end and extend the time to delivery, we're going to get really the baseline infrastructure out there as quickly as we can, and then make a commitment to begin to, and we will continue throughout to work on how we could provide that kind of functionality in a very early subsequent phase.
Governor Brainard, how can FedNow reach those without bank accounts?
Yeah, so I think that is, yep, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so obviously that's a very high priority for us. We think that making sure that instant payments reaches the broadest set of Americans as possible is one of the huge benefits of this service. As we know from a lot of research and surveys undertaken by the Federal Reserve System, also by some of our federal banking sister agencies, the sort of ability to access instant payments is particularly valuable for those who may be tightly managing cash flows, and that'll be true particularly for households, might be true for fixed income households, certainly those that work in gig economy types of work, but also for small businesses. Now, in terms of accessing those households, of course, the large majority do have bank accounts, but we know from FDIC research that there's a large number of underbanked as well. And trying to develop industry partnerships whereby additional service providers who work with those kinds of communities in turn work with banks, whether it be CDFI banks or whether it be MDI banks. There are a variety of partnerships out there that we think once they make that connection through a bank to instant payments, will be able to reach some of those populations. But it's certainly something we're going to continue through our community development work, through our surveys, to continue to understand why there are some populations that may not wish to be banked, and then figure out what kinds of partnerships best reach those types of communities.
I'll take the next question, which is, have the ISO 20022 message specifications published for the core service? If not, when will it be available to members? As President George mentioned in her remarks earlier, we do have the FedNow community and an actual work group that is focused right now on the ISO specification. At this point, we have the message specs and flows in a draft representation, and the plan is for those work groups to evolve those particular flows and specs. We expect that we will have that finalized in the first quarter of next year. Going back to other questions, President George, can you talk more about when the service will launch and whether anything like pilots will happen before that date?
Yeah, so when the service will launch is also part of really getting a little further down the path of how we determine what our technology platform and approach is going to be. But based on the good work that Ken's doing, we look to be on track for the estimate that we put out last year in our Federal Register notice to say 2023 and 2024 look like reasonable timeframes to do it. But I would expect that over the coming year, we will be able to get a little more precise about when we think we will be able to deliver that service.
Governor Brainard, can you provide any information on the separate efforts to extend and expand the operating hours for Fedwire? You're on mute, Governor Brainard.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have also separately heard how important some banking institutions think it is to be able to also extend operating hours. I will say, as we thought about expanding Fedwire funds and National Settlement Service hours to support liquidity management, we quickly determined that providing a liquidity management tool as a core feature of the FedNow service will actually address the ability to support funds transfers around the clock, and that would be true with the core features and functionalities at launch. So we've certainly put a very high priority on developing the liquidity management tool for instant payments. As I noted earlier, it will be available both to FedNow Service participants and their traditional liquidity providers, as well as participants in the private sector service to fund the joint account that backs settlement in that service. So those kinds of entities will be able to use the liquidity management tool without actually signing up for the full functionality of the FedNow service. So I think that is the kind of core benefit of the liquidity management tool in conjunction with FedNow. Of course, we are also continuing to explore expanded hours for Fedwire funds and for NSS. Expanded hours for those services could bring additional benefits beyond just that liquidity management tool for instant payments. And so we're going to continue on the road to doing the necessary analysis to evaluate the benefits and the operational risk and policy considerations before coming out with a recommendation there.
President George, will the FedNow service support cross-border payments? If not, at what point will you consider cross-border functionality?
So Ken, this has been an important question for a long time, and it's one that we incorporated in the original description of our desired outcomes for a modern payment system in the United States, that we would look at this feature of cross-border functionality. I think important to our calculus of how to position the FedNow service at launch is not to diminish that we continue to think that's an important aspect of a more modern U.S. payment system, but really to recognize we need to be laser focused on getting that initial functionality domestically. And so that's where we will position the FedNow service. However, I would say we know cross-border payments continues to really be a point of need and interest. We see this coming out of many new features of payment services and functionalities that we see on the landscape. Today. So we will continue to keep that in focus. I suspect we will be that as it's in place, then we can begin to look forward on where those value-added features are going to apply. And my guess would be we will continue to hear about cross-border payments and want that to be part of future features and functionality we provide to this service.
The next question is, how closely is the Fed partnering with the Faster Payments Council to develop a widely adopted faster payment solution? I'll say that the Federal Reserve is a member of the Faster Payments Council, Council and is actively engaged in a number of work groups with the Faster Payments Council. Certainly, we all share an objective of educating consumers, educating institutions, and coming up with the best mechanisms for a faster payment solution. So it is an organization that we are very supportive of. As I've said, we're active members, and we'll continue to work jointly with them and other members as we go forward in terms of the faster payment journey. Governor Brainard, how will non-banks be able to participate in the FedNow service?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Good question. So we are thinking of the service as, like our other payment services, as available to institutions who are eligible to hold accounts at the reserve banks. That doesn't mean that we don't interact in our payment services with very important other entities that are critical parts of the ecosystem. So in other payment services, and I would anticipate the same thing to be true for instant payments, there are very important entities that are service providers or agents for participants in the FedNow service. We also expect that the FedNow platform to be a neutral platform that will encourage partnerships between banks and non-banks to provide innovative end-user services that will help drive adoption of instant payments and enhance the value of instant payments to users. So like in other payment services, we anticipate that the account holders, those who have accounts or eligible to have accounts with reserve banks, will be very important partners to other entities, either who are providing services to them, acting as agents to them, or engaging with them to provide value-added services and to expand service offerings over time.
Governor Brainard, has COVID-19 accelerated any aspect of FedNow? For example, if the need of further stimulus is needed in the future, will FedNow be a platform that the government will be able to use to disperse money more quickly and efficiently?
Well, you know, Ken, I will say, as you know, as Esther knows, the need to disperse payments quickly via, you know, our payment system, acting as a fiscal agent for Treasury, has certainly heightened our awareness of just how important getting instant access to emergency payments is for households that are more cash constrained and for whom those payments really can make a huge difference in their ability to meet financial obligations and to continue and resume spending patterns. And it's been very interesting to see very early research just how strong the evidence is in some of those research papers that those CARES Act emergency payments change spending habits or spending patterns. You know, a lot of households had been forced to cut back quite substantially in the early days of the crisis. And, you know, the research suggests that, you know, upon receipt of those funds, their expenditures immediately went up and continued for the 10 days following it. And it's also interesting to see just how concentrated those kinds of patterns were among households that have lower incomes, that experienced greater income declines, and that had lower liquid savings to begin with. And of course, you know, we sort of expect that. We just haven't seen such a direct case of it and research to be able to examine that pattern. So what that says to us is, yes, the urgency of delivering on an instant payments system is great. And it just reminds us how important an instant payment system is, particularly for small businesses and households, that are for whom money is tight and managing cash flows is challenging.
So I'll take the next question, which is, will you be making available messages similar to request for payment messaging to enhance customers' abilities beyond moving funds? So the answer is that in the first version of FedNow, we will be rolling out a request for payments message. And our plan is, as President George said earlier, is to continue to evolve the product offering. And so while that will be something in the initial implementation, we'll continue to work with the community to identify what are other feature and functions we would need to put into the product as we go forward. So as we've said, there's a lot of collaboration we see occurring as we continue to evolve the service. And as we get these sorts of recommendations, we'll prioritize those as we look to implement them and move forward. President George, the next question is for you, and that is, what operating procedures and rules will the FedNow service be governed by, and when would those be available?
Well, those are critical to any of our services, but I can assure you that we will be putting out the technical and the operational documentation that will go along with this service. And will establish what I think the industry has come to expect in terms of terms of use that we put in the form of a Reserve Bank operating circular. So we'll be doing that for the FedNow service, just as we do for the others. And we will make sure that those are available in advance of that service launch through what also you've come to expect is our very established communication channels. So we know that how the operating procedures and rules will apply to this are going to be important to your planning, and you will have time to see as we get further along in establishing the details of the service, how that's going to work. So it should look familiar to you in terms of the form it takes, and any specifics related to FedNow will be clearly highlighted in those.
So the next question is, pilots were mentioned earlier. Do you have any more information on what kind of testing of pilots will you be doing, and how can my bank be involved? Certainly there will be an extensive set of testing as we go through the implementation of FedNow. We are actually designing a pilot program as we speak, with the expectation is we're going to begin to engage the industry later this year. We are going to be looking for a number of different partners in terms of that pilot activity so that we get a representation of size as well as other functionality of particular participants. Our plan would be to select different pilot participation early in the next year, and then we would look to expand the number of pilot participants based on the development of the processes as well as the actual FedNow solution itself. It is something, as we said earlier, we want to be completely transparent. So as we're looking at these pilot engagements, our plan would be to share the information and the learnings that are occurring so that as we're bringing other pilots on as well as other eventual participants on, we would have the benefit of this extended pilot process. As we've been looking at FedNow implementation, and talking to other implementations around the world of instant payments of other central banks, one of the things that has been highlighted is start the partnership and pilot testing as early in the process as feasible. And that's certainly something that we are engaged in and are committed to as we move the conversion effort forward. Well, non-banks were discussed previously. How do you envision FedNow will facilitate innovation by the industry outside of banks?
Yeah, so I think, we have really good relationships with non-banks. They have been, whether it be core service providers or fintechs or retailers. We have had very strong levels of engagement all the way through, whether it be in the Faster Payments Task Force, more recently on the multiple sets of comments we've received in the broader FedNow community. This infrastructure is just that. It is a platform that we anticipate will only work if banks and their partners really embrace it. We know banks' partners will need to help with readiness, preparedness. We need to engage with them, particularly core service providers early on in order to make it possible for some of the banks that are going to use them to onboard early. We also know that fintechs are going to be some of the places where we see some really interesting innovation that is going to improve the user experience and add services that we're not even really aware of or thinking about. It's really, we create that platform, and what we heard from innovation firms was just create a neutral platform so that we have a chance to innovate. And there may be some use cases that retailers or fintech or other kinds of tech firms come up with that are not sort of the use cases that a sort of narrower bank-only community would come up with. So I think by creating that neutral platform, banks in partnership with these other kinds of companies will in fact be able to offer just much more innovative services that right now we may not even be imagining.
So we're at the top of the hour. The final question is, there's a lot of information that we shared today. Where can my bank get more information about FedNow going forward? I'll say that both Governor Brainard and President George have both mentioned how we want to be very transparent, we want to be inclusive, and we really want to engage the community as we go forward, and as we've had to this point regarding the implementation of FedNow. So I'd encourage you to be involved in the FedNow community. Go to our frbservices.org site, and then basically just stay involved with what we're doing relative to our outreach efforts related to FedNow. So we want to say thank you very much on behalf of the Federal Reserve for your time today and your interest in the FedNow service. We look forward, as I was just saying, to your continued engagement as we work towards this service's launch. Thank you for your participation.